My family planned a secret family vacation without me. What I found out changed everything, and then, in Raleigh, North Carolina, I was always the quiet one. In a family that thrived on noise and energy, I found my place on the sidelines. My brother Ryan, the eldest, is 37 and everything I'm not. Outgoing, funny, and impossible to ignore. My sister Sophie, 34, has a natural charm that turns heads wherever she goes. She's the kind of person who can walk into a room and own it within minutes. And then there's me, Adam, 29 years old and more comfortable fixing a broken computer than making small talk. If you asked my family to describe me, I'm sure they'd say something like, "Oh, Adam? He's the quiet one, the steady one." That's me, a background character in my own story. Our parents, Margaret and Thomas, worked hard to give us a good life. Mom used to be a preschool teacher, part-time since Sophie was born, and Dad worked in construction management. We weren't wealthy, but we always had enough. Birthdays were celebrated with cakes from the local bakery, Christmas mornings were chaotic but warm, and family dinners were loud and full of laughter. Loud was just the way things were. Ryan would crack jokes that left everyone gasping for air, and Sophie could tell a story so vividly you'd swear you were there. Meanwhile, I'd sit quietly, my plate half finished, waiting for the right moment to contribute, only to find that the moment never came. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I know they did, and still do. It's just that their world moved so fast and shone so brightly, I never felt like I could keep up. Ryan and Sophie were the stars, the ones whose opinions mattered. Even Mom and Dad seemed to lean on them more. If there was a family decision to be made, they'd ask Ryan and Sophie first. By the time they got to me, the decision was usually already made. I used to think it didn't bother me. I told myself I didn't care about being the center of attention. I had my own world, computers, books, and a few close friends who understood me. But as the years went by, that nagging feeling of being overlooked started to grow, like a small crack in a foundation that you don't notice until it spreads. I remember one family dinner vividly. Ryan was telling this ridiculous story about a prank he pulled on a coworker, and the whole room was in stitches. Sophie chimed in with a joke of her own, and the laughter doubled. I tried to share something about a project I was working on at my IT job, but my voice barely registered. A few polite nods, and then the conversation shifted back to Sophie's latest travel adventure. That was the moment I realized how invisible I felt. I don't think they meant to make me feel that way. It's just how the dynamics worked. Ryan and Sophie shone so brightly, and I was content to stay in the shadows. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Despite everything, I've always tried to be there for my family. When Mom and Dad celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary a few years ago, I pitched in without hesitation for the big party we threw for them. When Sophie needed help paying off her student loans, I lent her money. When Ryan's car broke down, I covered part of the repair costs. I never asked for anything in return. That's what family is supposed to do, right? You help each other out because you love them, not because you're keeping score. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if they even noticed how much I gave. Did they see me as someone they could count on, or just someone who was there when they needed something? At work, I'm the guy who fixes problems without drawing attention to myself. My job as an IT specialist is to keep things running smoothly, and I'm good at it. But just like at home, I'm used to being noticed only when something goes wrong. If you had asked me a month ago how I felt about my life, I would have said it was fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. I had a steady job, a roof over my head, and a family that, despite its quirks, I loved deeply. I didn't need to be the star of the show, or at least that's what I thought. Everything changed the evening I walked into the kitchen and heard Mom and Sophie talking in hushed tones. They didn't notice me at first, so I caught a snippet of their conversation. "We need to finalize the cottage booking soon," Sophie was saying. "If we wait, it'll be gone." A cottage? Booking? I frowned, confused. This wasn't the kind of casual conversation my family usually had. "What are you two whispering about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. They both jumped like they'd been caught sneaking snacks before dinner. Mom turned to me with a bright smile that felt a little forced. "Oh, nothing important," she said, waving her hand like it was no big deal. "Just talking about a hypothetical trip. You know, one of those maybe someday plans." Yeah, Sophie added, her voice just a touch too cheerful. Nothing's set in stone. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept their explanation. But something about the way they brushed me off didn't sit right. My family wasn't known for hypothetical plans. If they were talking about a trip, chances were it was already in motion. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe I'd misheard or misunderstood. I decided to let it go for now. But as the days went by, little things kept adding up. Conversations would stop abruptly when I walked into a room. Dad was on the phone one afternoon, speaking in a low voice. I caught him saying something about using the reserve, but as soon as he noticed me, he ended the call. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just handling some house stuff," he said, his tone casual. Too casual. It was like there was a secret they didn't want me to know. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Families have inside jokes and private discussions all the time, right? Just because I wasn't involved didn't mean something shady was going on. But no matter how much I tried to push the feeling aside, it lingered. That uneasy feeling grew stronger when I noticed Sophie texting one evening. As I walked past her, I caught a glimpse of the screen. She quickly tilted her phone away, but not before I saw the words. "Who's going for sure? Did you confirm yet?" "What's up?" I asked, pretending not to notice her reaction. "Oh, nothing important," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Just making plans with some friends." I nodded, but the pit in my stomach grew. It wasn't just one odd moment. It was a pattern, and it felt like I was the one being left out. For the first time in my life, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was happening behind my back, something they didn't want me to know about. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't fine with it. Not this time. The strange moments didn't stop. Every day, it felt like another piece of a puzzle was falling into place. Except I didn't have the picture on the box to tell me what I was looking at. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Dad on the phone again. He's always been private about his conversations, but this time, his voice was lower than usual, almost conspiratorial. "We'll just dip into the reserve for that," he said. "It should cover everything." When he looked up and saw me, his expression changed instantly. His face softened into a forced smile, and he ended the call abruptly. "Hey, Adam. How's work going?" he asked, as if he hadn't just been talking in code. "Busy as usual," I said, playing along. "What reserve were you talking about?" "Oh, nothing important," he said, brushing me off. "Just a little fund we've got for emergencies." I nodded, but his answer didn't sit right with me. Dad was organized, the kind of man who color-coded his tools and kept a ledger for household expenses. If he had an emergency fund, I would have known about it. Later that week, I caught Sophie texting on her phone. She was sitting on the couch, grinning at her screen, completely absorbed in her conversation. I walked past her, pretending not to notice, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw the message. "Who's going for sure? Did you confirm yet?" She noticed me and immediately tilted her phone away. "What's up?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes gave her away. "Nothing. Just curious what you're texting about." "Oh, nothing important," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Just making plans with some friends." It was the same excuse she'd used in the kitchen with Mom. Too casual, too rehearsed. I didn't press her. I've never been one for confrontation. I figured I'd wait, let the truth come to me naturally. But the truth didn't come. What came instead were more whispers, more half-answers, and more moments that made me feel like I was the outsider in my own family. The final straw came a few days later. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and Dad asked me to fix his laptop. I'd lost count of how many times I'd been the family tech guy. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't mind. Fixing things was what I did best. I went into Dad's office and found his laptop buried under a stack of papers on his desk. As I moved things around, looking for a spare charging cable, a folder caught my eye. It was labeled in bold black letters, "Vacation Fund." I froze. My mind flashed back to the snippets of conversations I'd overheard. The cottage booking, the reserve, Sophie's texts. My gut told me this folder might hold the answers I'd been looking for. I hesitated. Snooping wasn't my style, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But the uneasiness that had been building in me for weeks pushed me forward. I opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, neatly organized with tabs for each year. The columns listed contributions, expenses, and balances. At the top of the contributions column were the names: Margaret, Thomas, Ryan, and Sophie. My name wasn't there. I flipped to another tab labeled Nova Scotia Itinerary. It was a detailed plan for a 2-week trip, complete with flight details, accommodations, and activities. The list of attendees included Mom, Dad, Ryan, Sophie, but not me. I stared at the spreadsheet, my hands gripping the edges of the folder. This wasn't just an oversight or a casual plan they forgot to mention. This was something they'd been working on for years, a trip, a fund, a whole family event, and they'd intentionally left me out. I closed the folder and put it back where I found it, my mind racing. How could they do this? Didn't I matter to them? Had I done something wrong? Or was I just that easy to forget? For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. At dinner, I barely said a word. I kept replaying the details in my mind. The names on the spreadsheet, the itinerary, the years of planning. By the time I got home, my emotions were boiling over. Hurt, anger, confusion. They all mixed together, making it impossible to think straight. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but I didn't know how to start the conversation without everything unraveling. A few days later, I decided I couldn't let it go any longer. The next family dinner was my chance. If they wanted to leave me out, they could at least have the decency to tell me why. That Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house feeling like a storm cloud ready to burst. The dinner started off like any other. Mom had made her roast chicken, Ryan was cracking jokes, and Sophie was talking about some new project at work. I stayed quiet, waiting for the right moment. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, I cleared my throat. "Can we talk about something?" I said, my voice steady but louder than usual. Everyone turned to look at me. Ryan raised an eyebrow, Sophie looked curious, and Mom tilted her head with that familiar gentle smile. "Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind?" Mom said. I took a deep breath. I found out about the vacation fund. The room fell silent. Ryan and Sophie exchanged a quick glance, and Mom's smile faltered. Dad set his coffee cup down and suddenly seemed very interested in the floor. "What about it?" Ryan asked cautiously. "I didn't even know it existed until a few days ago," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. "And now I find out you've been planning a trip to Nova Scotia without me." Sophie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "It's not like that, Adam. Then what is it like?" I asked, looking directly at her. "We didn't think you'd be interested," she said, her voice softer now. "You didn't think I'd be interested," I repeated, the words stinging as they left my mouth. "You didn't even ask." Mom jumped in, her tone placating. "Adam, honey, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought, well, you're not really part of the fund." I stared at her, stunned. "Not part of the fund? What does that even mean? I'm part of this family, aren't I?" "Of course you are," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "It's just, when we started it, you were just getting started with your job, and we didn't want to put pressure on you to contribute. So you decided for me," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You didn't tell me about it. You didn't even give me the choice." Dad finally spoke, his tone defensive. "It wasn't personal, Adam. We just didn't think it was a big deal." "Not a big deal?" I said, the anger bubbling up. "You've been planning this for years, and you never thought to include me. How is that not a big deal?" The room went silent. For the first time, they didn't have an answer. I stood up, my heart pounding. "I'm done being the afterthought in this family. If you don't want me to be a part of things, fine. But at least have the guts to admit it." Without waiting for a response, I walked out the door. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I belonged in my own family. The drive home that night felt heavier than usual. The roads were dark and quiet, but my mind was a storm. Every word from that dinner replayed in my head, each one stinging more than the last. "You're not really part of the fund. We didn't think you'd be interested." It wasn't personal. Their words ran in circles, each a reminder of how little I seemed to matter in the grand scheme of my family's life. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't decide if I was angrier at them for excluding me or at myself for always letting it slide. Over the next few days, I tried to push it aside, but the hurt lingered like a splinter I couldn't remove. My family didn't seem to notice the weight of what had happened. Ryan sent a group text about his latest work project, Sophie shared pictures from her recent brunch with friends, and Mom asked if anyone could help her organize the attic. Business as usual. Meanwhile, I was stuck, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was it deliberate? Had I done something to make them think I didn't belong? Or was I just so invisible to them that they didn't even realize what they were doing? The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about the vacation fund or the trip. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of being the outsider in my own family. I'd always told myself it was just my personality, that I wasn't as loud or as charming as Ryan and Sophie, so naturally, I'd fade into the background. But now, I wasn't so sure. A few days later, I decided I needed answers. If my family wasn't going to acknowledge what they'd done, I'd have to force the issue. It started with a call to my mom. "Hi, sweetie," she said brightly when she answered. "What's going on?" "Hey, Mom," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. "I wanted to talk about the other night." There was a pause, just long enough to let me know she wasn't thrilled about where this was going. "Oh," she said, her voice softening. "I hoped we could move past that." "Move past it?" I repeated. "Mom, you've been planning a family trip for years, and I didn't even know about it. How am I supposed to just move past that?" "Adam, honey," she said, her tone shifting to that placating one she always used when she thought I was overreacting. "It's not what you think. We didn't mean to exclude you. It just happened." "It just happened," I said flatly. "You've been saving for this trip for years, and somehow, it just happened that no one told me?" She sighed. "We didn't want to pressure you. You've always been so busy with work, and we thought it would be hard for you to contribute." "It wasn't personal." There it was again. "Not personal? How is it not personal?" I asked. "You made a decision about me without even talking to me. You didn't give me a choice. That feels pretty personal." "Adam, please," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We love you. You're part of this family." "Am I?" I shot back, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Because right now, it doesn't feel like it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Sweetie," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry. I really am. We never meant to hurt you. Can we talk about this in person? Maybe at the next family dinner?" I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. "Sure," I said. "We'll talk about it then." But when I hung up, I didn't feel any better. The following Sunday, I showed up at their house with a knot in my stomach. Everyone was there. Ryan, Sophie, Mom, and Dad, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. I sat quietly through dinner, waiting for the right moment. After the plates were cleared, I finally spoke up. "Can we talk about the trip?" I said, my voice cutting through the casual chatter. The room fell silent. "What about it?" Ryan asked cautiously. "Why wasn't I included?" I asked, looking at each of them in turn. Sophie shifted uncomfortably. "We thought you wouldn't be interested," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You thought I wouldn't be interested," I said, the words heavy in my mouth. "Did it ever occur to you to ask me?" "Adam," Dad said, his tone defensive, "we didn't mean to hurt you. We just didn't think it was a big deal." "Not a big deal?" I said, my voice rising. "You've been planning this for years, and you didn't think I'd want to be part of it? How is that not a big deal?" Mom reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled back. "Honey, we're sorry," she said. "We didn't handle this the right way. But can't we move forward? We're a family." I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. "I'm tired of being the afterthought," I said, my voice shaking. "If you want to move forward, start treating me like I matter. Until then, I'm done." I walked out without looking back. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone as the missed calls and unread texts piled up. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd truly spoken my mind to my family. But the silence that followed was deafening. The days after I walked out of that family dinner were some of the quietest and loneliest I'd ever experienced. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from my parents, Ryan, and Sophie, but I couldn't bring myself to answer any of them. I needed space to think. to process everything that had happened without their voices in my head, trying to justify what they'd done. At first, the silence felt like a relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to force myself into their conversations or waiting for them to notice me. But as the days stretched into weeks, that silence became suffocating. I couldn't stop replaying our arguments in my head, dissecting every word, every excuse they'd given me. We thought you wouldn't be interested. It wasn't personal. Can't we move forward? Each phrase felt like a fresh cut, a reminder of how little they seemed to understand or care about how they'd hurt me. I spent a lot of time with my closest friend, Lucas, during those weeks. Lucas had been my sounding board since high school, one of the few people who really got me. We met up at a coffee shop one evening, and as soon as we sat down, the words poured out of me. "I don't even know what hurts more," I said, staring down at the cup of coffee in front of me. The fact that they left me out for years, or the way they're acting like I should just get over it now that I've found out. Lucas listened quietly, nodding as I vented. When I finally ran out of steam, he leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment. "You're focusing a lot on the money," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's not about the money. It's about them leaving me out." "Exactly," Lucas said. "It's not the fund itself that's bothering you. It's what the fund represents. They made a decision without you. They excluded you, and now they're trying to sweep it under the rug without really understanding why it hurts." I sat back, his words hitting me like a punch to the gut. He was right. It wasn't about the money or the trip to Nova Scotia. It was about feeling like I didn't matter, like I wasn't part of the family in the same way Ryan and Sophie were. "So, what do I do?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "How do I fix this?" "You've got to talk to them," Lucas said. "Not about the fund or the trip, but about how this made you feel. If they don't get that, nothing else is going to change." The thought of another confrontation made my stomach twist. I'd already put everything out there at that family dinner, and it had felt like screaming into the void. But Lucas was right. Ignoring them wasn't solving anything. That night, I lay in bed replaying his advice over and over in my head. As much as I hated the idea, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding my family forever. At some point, I'd have to face them again and make them understand what this had done to me. About a week later, Ryan called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. If he was reaching out, it had to be important. "Hey," I said cautiously. "Hey, Adam," Ryan said, his voice quieter than usual. "Can we talk?" "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Everything," he said. "The fund, the trip, all of it." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "Look," he said, exhaling deeply. "We messed up. Big time. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and you're right. We didn't include you, and that's on us. I guess we thought you weren't as into family stuff as the rest of us." "What does that even mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know, man," Ryan admitted. "You've always been the quiet one, doing your own thing. I guess we took that as you not wanting to be as involved. But looking back, that's on us, not you. We pushed you away without even realizing it." His words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it felt genuine. Still, the hurt was too fresh for me to let it go so easily. "So you just decided I wasn't interested," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Without even asking me?" "I know," Ryan said quickly. "It was stupid. We didn't think it through. And the truth is, we got comfortable with it. It was easier to keep things the way they were than to fix it." "I'm sorry, Adam." "Really?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to make him feel the way I'd felt all these years. But another part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in my family, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the start of making things right. But then Ryan said something that made my stomach drop. "Also," he added cautiously, "I feel like you should know. The trip's next month." I froze. "What?" "The Nova Scotia trip," he said. "It's happening next month. Mom and Sophie wanted to wait before telling you, but I thought you deserved to know." "You're kidding," I said, my voice shaking. "Alex, I'm sorry," Ryan said quickly. "I didn't think it was right either. That's why I'm telling you now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, They still hadn't planned to tell me about the trip. It was one thing to exclude me from the fund, but now they were actually going on the vacation they'd been planning for years, and I wasn't even invited. We hung up soon after, and I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. The anger I'd felt in the weeks since I found out about the fund had simmered down, but now it was back, hotter than ever. This wasn't just about the trip anymore. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of being treated like an afterthought, and I was done letting it slide. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to act like I didn't matter, they needed to hear exactly how that made me feel. This time, I wouldn't let them dismiss me. They needed to understand that being family wasn't an excuse to ignore the people who were supposed to mean the most to you. I wasn't sure if they were ready to hear it, but I was ready to say it. The following Sunday, I walked into my parents' house for what Ryan had described as a family meeting. Everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Ryan, and Sophie, all seated in the living room with awkward expressions on their faces. I paused in the doorway, gripping the strap of my bag tightly. The tension in the room was almost suffocating, but I wasn't going to back down. I'd spent years keeping my feelings bottled up, letting them overlook me, but that was over. I took a seat across from them, meeting their eyes one by one. No one said anything, so I decided to break the silence. So, I began, my voice steady but firm. The trip's next month. Mom shifted uncomfortably. She glanced at Ryan, then back at me, her expression tinged with guilt. "We were going to tell you, sweetheart," she said. "When?" I asked. "After you got back?" Mom opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Adam, it's not like that," Sophie said, leaning forward. "We didn't want you to feel left out." "Really?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Because it sure feels like you didn't want me there." "Adam, please," Dad interjected, his tone calm but defensive. "We've already apologized. We didn't handle this the right way, but can't we just move forward?" "Move forward?" I repeated, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "That's all you ever say. But you don't actually deal with the problem. You just sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away." The room went quiet again. For the first time, they didn't have a quick response. "Do you know how it feels?" I continued, my voice breaking slightly despite my efforts to stay composed. "To find out that your own family has been planning something like this for years and didn't even think to include you? To hear that you're not part of something that's supposed to be about all of us?" Mom's eyes welled up with tears. She reached out toward me, but I shook my head. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad," I said, softening my tone. "I just need you to understand how much this hurt me. It's not about the trip or the money. It's about the fact that I've spent my whole life feeling like I don't matter as much as the rest of you. And this was just the final proof." Ryan leaned forward, rubbing the back of his neck. "Adam, we messed up. I know that. I don't know how we didn't see it before, but you're right. We've been treating you like an afterthought, and that's not fair. I'm sorry, man. For real." "Me too," Sophie added, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think about how it would feel to you, and that's on me. I'm really sorry." Mom wiped her eyes and nodded. "We never wanted you to feel this way, Adam. You're just as much a part of this family as anyone else. I hope you know that." "I want to believe that," I said, my voice steady again. "But I need more than words. I need you to show me that I matter." Dad spoke up, his tone softer now. "You're right. We can't just say we're sorry and expect everything to be fine. We'll do better, Adam. I promise." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. "Thank you. That's all I've ever wanted. To feel like I'm part of this family, not just the guy who fixes your computers." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling over the room. For the first time, it felt like they were really listening, really understanding what I was trying to say. Before I left that night, Mom pulled me aside. "Adam," she said, her voice shaky but sincere, "I know we've made mistakes, but I hope you'll come on the trip with us. It wouldn't be the same without you." I hesitated, the offer catching me off guard. "I appreciate that, Mom. I really do. But I think I need to sit this one out." Her face fell, and I quickly added, "It's not because I'm angry. I just need some time to process everything. Maybe next time." When we plan something together from the start, I'll feel differently." She nodded slowly. "I understand. And there will be a next time, I promise." In the weeks that followed, things started to change. They weren't perfect changes, but they were enough to make me feel like progress was being made. Mom began calling me more often, not just to chat, but to genuinely ask for my input on family decisions. She even asked me to help her plan a Sunday dinner, something she'd never done before. Ryan started inviting me out more, grabbing a beer, watching a game, or just hanging out like we used to when we were younger. Sophie sent random texts throughout the day, sharing funny memes or asking about my day. They weren't grand gestures, but they were steps in the right direction. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly being seen. The Nova Scotia trip came and went. I didn't regret skipping it. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about making a point. I needed them to understand that being part of the family wasn't just about showing up when it was convenient. It was about being included, being valued. Looking back, I realized that this whole experience had taught me something important. I'd spent years staying quiet, accepting less than I deserved because I didn't want to rock the boat. But standing up for myself didn't ruin my family. It forced us to confront the things we'd been ignoring for too long. Things still aren't perfect. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and old habits don't disappear easily. But for the first time in my life, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. And maybe, just maybe, I'm finally starting to feel like I belong.